I think anybody who writes contemporary spy novels in the 21st century is operating in the shadow of John le Carré, obviously, as the master of the genre. And there are elements in both Thomas Kell books, Foreign Country and the new book, A Colder War, which are conscious homages to le Carré. So if you see the opening chapter of A Colder War, I was looking at the opening chapter of The Spy Coming from the Cold and trying to do something, not something new with that, but to create a 21st century echo of that brilliant opening sequence. And there are moments from The Secret Pilgrim and moments from The Russia House. Kell's maxim, spying is waiting, is taken from le Carré, is taken from The Russia House. So Colder War is a mole hunt story, and Tinker Tailor is very obviously a mole hunt story, and it's, in order to write something like that, you're very conscious of the example and the kind of cultural weight of that masterpiece. And in Tinker Tailor there are 5 suspects, and the novel and the television series and the film adaptation all work on the same principle, that you're trying to find out which of the 5 guys is the traitor. So I was conscious that I didn't want to repeat that, I didn't want to rip that off, essentially. So what happens in Colder War is that there are 4 or 5 suspects, but you know fairly early on who the mole is, and it becomes a story really about Kell preventing that mole eluding justice rather than trying to identify who he or she is. What I felt with A Foreign Country was that what I'm always trying to do is to create suspenseful, interesting, page-turning stories, but with running in parallel to that interesting emotional, cultural, social behaviour and interesting characters. And I think that if there's one thing that I wanted to get into deeper in A Foreign Country, didn't necessarily succeed in doing so, it was Kell's personality. There's an argument you can make that he remains a little bit of a cipher through A Foreign Country. So in Colder War, which is obviously the sequel to that novel, I really wanted to explore Kell's personality and his personal situation, and to think more deeply and write more deeply about where it is that he is going. So you have a man whose marriage has failed, whose career is stalled, who has, in Foreign Country, enjoyed a great triumph, but he's still out in the cold, so to speak. And what happens in A Colder War is that he falls in love, and that has a transformative effect on him, and his outlook and his attitude to his work. And that was really the main drive of the novel, to write again a compelling and interesting, page-turning, exciting spy novel, but to have this powerful emotional undertow running through it at the same time. Well, the film rights to A Foreign Country and A Colder War have been sold to a company run by Colin Firth. So I guess the assumption is that Firth would play Kell, although the development process in the movie industry is so geologically slow that he could be 96 by the time any film is made. So I guess maybe then another actor would play Kell, but obviously I'd love Colin Firth to play Kell. My ideal Amelia Levine has always been Kristen Scott Thomas, possibly Kate Blanchett in dream casting. I haven't really thought about Rachel Wallinger, who is the young woman in A Colder War, who she could be played by. I love Emily Blunt a lot, so that might be fantastic casting. Why do I think spy novels are popular, or spy fiction, the spy genre? Why is it so enduring? I think it's the same reason that medical dramas are popular and detective shows. The stories are about people doing unusual jobs, specialized jobs, in heightened, exciting, dangerous circumstances often. And so that draws people out of their mundane everyday lives and takes them into an escapist environment. Particularly with spying, I think that there's something going on there about intellectual vanity, possibly. It's quite interesting, the number of people who come up to me and say, I don't understand why I wasn't tapped up for MI6 when I was at university, or MI5. And also, I think the idea of lying, very obviously in the double life, I think people do that in various different ways in their own personal lives sometimes, and therefore there's an echo in fiction that lands emotionally in some way. And I think, and you see this with Snowden a lot, and also with WikiLeaks and Assange, people feel that a certain sort of turbulence, a certain sense of restlessness, because they know that intelligence agencies, GCHQ, NSA and so forth, have information on them, or could have information on them, or if they wanted to, could invert their lives in about 6 hours. And so there is a kind of superpower, rightly or wrongly. The perception is that there's a sort of superpower that can be wielded by the security service or by SIS or by any number of intelligence services, which makes people feel vulnerable. I struggle with Edward Snowden in the sense that I've always worked on the assumption that if the government or agents of the government want to find out what I'm looking at on the internet, or read the emails that I'm sending, or listen to my phone calls, they can do so at the flick of a switch. And that's sort of part and parcel of living in this technologically sophisticated world that we all inhabit. And I also think that the accusations that he was making, and that Glenn Greenwald was levelling in The Guardian and so forth, that this snooping is widespread and individually targeted, I just think is that the public have been misled on that. If they want to build a case against somebody, they can do, but nobody is listening to your phone calls, nobody's reading your email unless they absolutely have to. They're far too busy, to be honest. And obviously the more basic kind of moral point is that you have a guy who is a sort of poster boy for freedom of speech and so forth, and yet he's falling into the hands of the Chinese in Hong Kong, and then he's going to the Putin-held Moscow, which is not exactly a kind of bastion of human rights and free speech. So there's a hypocrisy at work there, which I don't, which I think is very obvious. I don't really buy this knight in shining armor routine. I think it's false. Well, the easiest part, the best part about writing is not writing, to be honest, it's researching. So for Cold War I went to Istanbul, I went to Odessa, and to Kiev, and to a wonderful little island in the Mediterranean, Greek island called Chios. And all that stuff is fun. Obviously, you're not behind a desk, you're meeting interesting people, you're seeing amazing places, and you're working. Your imagination is running, and it's fun, and it's exciting and challenging to come up with interesting stories and ideas and sequences that may or may not be set in those places. The hardest part about writing is just the work, really. It's day after day after day, getting yourself out of bed and being clear-headed enough and inspired enough to write good sentences and to be coherent and to keep the story moving along and to hit your deadline. That's probably the best and worst parts of it. So if I could have dinner with 6 novelists, I would have dinner with John le Carré, with Graham Greene, although they would probably just end up talking and wouldn't get a word in edgeways. Richard Ford, the wonderful American writer, John Updike, who I studied a lot at university and read a lot of, Charlotte Bronte, and I think Doris Lessing would have been really good company. So is that 6? That's 6. Which book do I wish I'd written? I wish I had written Arthur Miller's autobiography, Time Bends, because that would mean that I was Arthur Miller and then I would have had a fantastic life. I would have written the Central American play of the 20th century, Death of a Salesman. I would have been married to Marilyn Monroe, which would have been great. And I think he lived a decent, noble life and was hugely influential as a writer, but also very admirable as a man. And Time Bends is a fantastic, beautiful, lyrical book about an extraordinary life.